Greetings, this is UAP. We're going to take a quick look at this destruction of images. This is something I think that goes along with possibly covering up a millennial reign if it has occurred. Have a look.
I'm the Mary and Michael Jaharis, curator for Byzantine art in the Department of Medieval Art in the Cloisters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Become part of the important core of the emerging Islamic world and what ideas go forward and what changes in the process. So today we have some very distinguished speakers. The first of our speakers is on the destruction of images, which is a topic that Robert Schick, a research fellow at the American Center of Oriental Research in Amman, Jordan, is particularly able to speak on brilliantly because he has been involved in the excavation and study of this material for decades and took me on a wonderful tour of the sites when I first went to Jordan asking for these loans for this exhibition. So I cannot imagine anyone who will know more or be more useful to you in trying to understand these issues. He has spent many years in Jerusalem. He has taught at universities all over the world and is just a very, very exciting scholar. So I hope you'll help me welcome Professor Schick.
Yes, well, thank you for the introduction. Well, for my presentation this afternoon, I want to present the puzzling questions involved with attempting to understand what's going on with so many churches in the modern area, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, where at some point, more or less in the 8th century, people choose to deliberately destroy the images of people, animals in the mosaic floors that are in just dozens and dozens and dozens of churches around in the area. Now, I wish I understood what's going on, but I don't really, because there are so many oddities of this, what's involved with this episode of deliberate destruction of the image, of which you see one spectacular example in this first photograph, where there had at one point been a person shown, but has been artistically altered and turned into a lovely plant. So this is a case of disguising an original image in a way that is being done artistically. Well, there are then dozens of examples of especially churches with mosaic floors filled with images that have this deliberate scrambling of cubes of the mosaic floor. Someone comes around, lifts the cubes out, scrambles them up and puts them back in place in a way that's done carefully enough that you can sort of see what the original image was, but the in some way offensive image has been scrambled up enough that it's no longer bothering anybody. And so then here you can see there are 4 people lined up there, and you can still sort of detect the outlines of the figures there. Well, so there's basic questions that I wish I would be able to answer, but I'll try to present what the problems are. Just what is this damage, destruction that's going on, and what's the area in which this damage occurs, and who did it, when did it happen, and why? They're all open questions that have multiple answers conceivable, but I can't really definitively say I can answer any of these questions or explain just what's involved here. Well, so then in general, most cases you have scrambling up of the mosaic cubes of the complete figures here at one of the churches at the site of Rasas in Jordan, where you have the head and most of the upper body of the image that's in the floor. You have the cubes taken out, scrambled up, and put back in place. This is a typical example of what goes on in most of the cases of these dozens of mosaic floors in the area. And it's not just people, you have animals as well. In this case, this at one point had been a bird, put in as an attractive design where the bird had once been. So it's not just human beings, it's all sorts of animals, birds, fish, lions, bears, sheep, goats, whatever. So it's every sort of living being in these mosaic floors get deliberately damaged or destroyed, or the cubes scrambled up. And in this case, another case, you have a church at a site in Amman dated by its dedicatory inscription to 687 AD, where the people have removed the cubes of the head of the peacock and the legs, leaving the rest of the body more or less intact, and in this case not putting the cubes back, but simply leaving the damaged image this way. Removing the head and the feet was enough in this case to resolve the problem of this offensive image without the people here seeing the need to scramble up or destroy the entire body of the animal. Well, then another example in the city of Madaba in Jordan, where you see the entire mosaic floor originally was filled with images of people and animals in that one. In this case, the cubes were not put back, but simply left with the bedding of the mosaic floor exposed. And in this case, then they weren't putting the cubes back as they were in the earlier examples that we had seen. But then again, all of the images here, people, animals, get destroyed. And this is then sort of a puzzling question. Well, this is not exactly the same thing as what's going on with iconoclasm. There's a period of time when Christians decide that the veneration of icons is not appropriate, so they destroy icons. Icons being images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, the saints that are worthy of veneration in churches. And so that's the problem in the Byzantine Empire with iconoclasm. This phase of deliberate destruction in these churches in the area of Israel, Palestine, Jordan is not really iconoclasm. That's not an appropriate word to use. Here it's the destruction of images in general. And now then other cases where you have an image removed, and in this case you can't tell what the original image was. They've taken the cubes of the image away and just patched it with larger sized, different plain white mosaic cubes, and so you can't tell what was originally there, but you know there had to have been an image there, because it's not just accidental damage, it's very deliberately focused where an image of an animal would once have been. And so then other examples where the damage is not done as carefully or as artistically as in some of the earlier examples that we saw. This is one of the more elaborate cases of the deliberate damage. This is the most humorous example of the deliberate elimination of an image that's being done very carefully in an artistically appealing way to have the mosaic look attractive when the operation is finished. And I hope you can see that originally there was a bull here. You can see the hind legs, the tail, the front legs, and a little bit of the hump of the back of the bull that originally would have been depicted here. And this inscription is a quote from the Bible, "And the lion and the bull will lie down and eat fodder together."
Just amazing that he says that, because that is not in the Bible. It now reads, "And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. And the cow and the bear will graze their young will graze. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw with the ox." I looked up a bull with a lion, and there is an ancient text, the only one that I could really find that referenced a bull with a lion, and that was from an Aesop fable. And it's really odd, because in this Aesop fable, the lion is saying to the bull that it has a lamb ready to eat, and the bull is going to go dine on the lamb with the lion, but then the lion thinks it's going to eat the bull, and the bull walks away. I just thought it was so strange, because since when would a bull eat mutton? But it says it in the text. There's a reference, a concordance that went with it, with commentary I read, and it said in these times, in these ancient times, it was believed, and it was written in literature, that bulls would eat lamb or mutton, that they would do that. Like, that's news to me.
There's an image of peaceful paradise when lions and bulls will be peaceably living together. So there's a bull here, a lion would have been over here, and someone has very artistically removed the bulk of the body of the bull and put in a tree, and a funny-looking tree there, and then this vase and vine scrolls. Very artistically done to replace the image of the bull that's no longer acceptable, but then leaving a little trace of what the image originally had once been.
So if this kingdom was established and it's still here, yet Satan was released again to deceive the world, would he not make it so that we don't know about this holy mountain from which the kingdom of the millennium proceeds, or proceeded, or still does to an extent? I think that it could very well be this mountain that is said to encompass the central portal, the North Pole of the Earth, the center circle around the middle opening of the Earth. And the mountain is not just a haphazard rock pile, it's actually a building, it's a kingdom. It's a living mountain. It has dwellings in it, and that is hidden from us. Could be. I think it's also interesting, too, that the most significant place on Earth would definitely be hidden. It is logical that we would have this area kind of off limits.
And just another example of one of the dozens and dozens of cases of this, where what you realize what's going on isn't so totally clear. Well, originally, if you look at just these two images, you might say, well, that's rather careless. It's not carefully following the outlines of the animals the way the earlier examples were. So you might say, well, that's just sort of accidental. But then you look here and here and here, you again realize you have the animals with the cubes removed so carefully that you can still see the outlines of the original animals. But then when you look further, you see that this image was destroyed, but this one is left completely intact. And you have a bird here, a bird here, a bird here that were completely destroyed, but then the birds here are left undamaged. You have a obliterated bird here and here and here, but then undamaged birds here and here. And so in this case, about half of the animals are destroyed. The other half are left undamaged, which is peculiar. What's leading the people to get rid of some of the images, but not others? And I wish I could explain this, but I can't. And there are other examples where some or most, but not all of the images are removed. In other cases, every single one of the dozens of images in any given floor are, in fact, damaged. Others where it's sort of only partially done, and I can't just quite figure out just what's going on here.
Yeah, it is hard. I think, though, they were eliminating whatever indicated the millennial reign took place. I think they eliminated also signs of technology that they didn't want people to know about so that they could reintroduce or use surreptitiously without anybody knowing that exists. Like dirigibles, like transcontinental radio communication devices, radio phones, things like that that have been around for as long as time, I think. Crystal radios, resonant frequency weapons, things like that. That's my hypothesis. I have seen evidence of some of these things that they failed to scrub from the record. It's interesting.
Every Christian denomination in the area are doing this damage. It's not one Christian group and another doesn't. It's everybody, both Chalcedonians and people who oppose the Chalcedonians. So every Christian group is doing this damage. And there's other churches where you definitely have opponents of the Council of Chalcedon doing the damage. Other churches that are definitely Chalcedonians, they're doing it. So every Christian group is doing it. Also, we have the question of Jews are also doing this deliberate damage. And you may know that Jews have no problems with having images in their mosaic floors, this spectacular zodiac from a synagogue in northern Israel, a place called Beit Alpha, where Jews are perfectly comfortable having images of zodiacs or whatever in their synagogues. But there are also then some examples where in synagogues this same deliberate elimination of images is happening. And there's one very good example, a synagogue called Susia, south of Hebron, where we have a very clear example of a synagogue suffering this same amount of the deliberate damage. And so it's clear it's this desire to get rid of images transcends Christian theology. It's also Jews doing the same thing at the same time. Well, and so then the question, when is this damage happening?
Well, the when is after these dates, so it would be right around 1000 if you ask me. He says it happens just in the decades afterwards, but I think differently. But it is very, very interesting that it would include all Christian denominations and as well as Jews as well.
A question, why are Christians and Jews, obliterating their images. There's no obvious Christian or Jewish theological motivation for this. There's no explicit literary source that says in the year so-and-so the Christians and the Jews damaged their images. I'm inclined to think it's all happening more or less the same time.
Same time, yeah. And it is at 1000 AD that it begins. Now, this, I thought, was extremely interesting. The next speaker in this lecture evening, the final one that I'm going to present in this presentation, but this other speaker talks about this Geniza chamber. Extremely fascinating. It's basically a hole in the wall where they tossed books in. Not just books, but anything written materials from the times. And it's basically mostly religious texts, as is typical of most of the literature, but these are handwritten manuscripts, but all kinds of things. It includes like junk mail. It includes ledgers, logs, all kinds of data. It's really probably the best source of history from 1000 AD to about 1896 when it got parted out. So starting in 1000 AD, they started just tossing books into this hole, which is this giant room in this synagogue. So somebody would get a certificate of divorce or certificate of marriage or an inventory of their merchant store or whatever type things they would just throw in there. Poetry, all kinds of stuff. Tremendous amounts of data just thrown in there. And the bulk of the material, as you'll hear, comes from the first 250 years of that period, so 1000 AD to 1250 AD. And the interesting thing about it is once it was fully discovered, of course that's after 1850, and it gets cataloged, but it also gets broken up, and much of it goes into private collections, not to a university specifically.
Started to take notice of the Geniza, and from time to time those who made their way to Cairo managed to acquire some of its contents for their own personal libraries. A major turning point came in 1896 when Solomon Schechter, professor of rabbinics at Cambridge University, who was in the midst of a contentious scholarly disagreement, was shown a scrap from the Geniza that clinched the dispute in his favor. With the zeal of the newly converted, Schechter set off for Cairo and in short order had succeeded in procuring all of the remaining manuscripts for Cambridge University's library. Altogether, a staggering 250,000 manuscripts, or close to 750,000 individual pages, were removed from the Geniza and are currently dispersed among some 20 research libraries and private collections in the US and Europe. While manuscript pages were consigned to the Geniza more or less continuously from the 11th century until shortly before Schechter's arrival in Cairo, the lion's share of the material dates from between the years 1000 and 1250, which is often called the classical Geniza period.
Well, that's all for this one. I did my best in the short amount of time I had to do it to find out some of the interesting things that could be gleaned from these documents they pulled out of this storage, Geniza. But I didn't find anything. It seems that the information has yet to be really gone through properly, or if it has been, that nobody has really shared it, at least on the internet. So maybe you have access to this knowledge, and you could include in the comments anything interesting that you would happen to know about what they have found in these documents that could tell us what was really going on in the years 1000 to 1250. Were they in a period of transition from a millennial reign? Was there a massive worldwide deception happening in a cover-up of the true history? I think so. I think it's quite possible. And the evidence is out there. We can uncover it if we try. This is UAP. I'll thank you for listening and hope to see you on the next time. Thank you.